I was just looking at a study where this researcher was looking at the 5 top themes that help people to recover from illness, and one of them was emotions. Hormones are emotional messengers. We produce and respond to things in our life through hormones and neurotransmitters. We've had trauma, adverse childhood events, and how we show up to perimenopause is basically how we've been showing up to life, but it hasn't always been visible. There's a lot of conversation right now about hormone replacement therapy being like a Band-Aid, and that we have a fuller physiology connected to psychology. It's not always just jumping into the HRT and thinking that's going to work, and that's why it doesn't work for every woman.
Hey there, I'm Bria, and welcome to the Period Whisperer podcast. If you're over 35 and ready for real answers about your hormones, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe and stay with us. Hey there, sisters. Welcome back to the Period Whisperer podcast. My question for you today is, what if everything you've been told about aging, hormones, and even nutrition is actually just missing half of the picture? Today on the show, I'm joined by Dr. Deanna Minich, a pioneer in functional nutrition who blends science, spirituality, which I love, and what she calls eating the rainbow to completely reframe how we think about health in midlife. So we're going to dive into why your body is not actually meant to decline, how detox really works, the surprising role of melatonin beyond sleep, and even some other tools that she loves, and how to start making more informed decisions in a world of wellness noise. So, if you're here to understand your body on a deeper level, this one is going to shift things. Welcome, Dr. Deanna Minich, to the Period Whisperer podcast.
Oh, it's so great to be here with you. It's one of my favorite topics to speak on, both personally and professionally. So thanks for having me.
Oh, I love that. And I love your energy. I just think, right away, it's been so great to connect with you and have you on the show.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Can you start? I always like to start with your journey. Can you start a bit about your journey into the world of nutrition science and what led you to kind of bridge science, spirituality, and art into your approach to health?
Yeah, I think my path started with my mother, actually. So when I was between 8 and 9 years old, my mother was going through her own personal transformation. So she was pregnant. And we know that for many women, when they become pregnant, they start thinking about their lives because now there's another life coming in. And so for her, it was all about food and faith. So I'm 55. I grew up in the 1970s. And at that time, it really wasn't cool to be into food and faith. So, we were doing things like instead of Wonder Bread, my mom was making these brown bread sandwiches. Anyway, all of which I just really pushed away because I felt like that's not cool. And I want to be like the other kids. So as a teenager, I basically developed an eating disorder, lots of overeating, sneaking. I was always drawn to sweet foods. And I developed a lot of reproductive and gut issues. I kind of smile at the name of your podcast because if you were to interview me in my 20s or my 30s, my take on my period would have been very different than what it is at 55. I feel like, our menstrual period is the cycle that we're enmeshed within is so telling about our overall health. So in general, I developed a lot of health issues. I went on to study science, and then I was like, you know what? My mom is right. Nutrition is a big deal. So I went on to grad school, went to go and study nutrition. I was still kind of working with all of my reproductive issues. I had endometriosis. I had a blocked fallopian tube on my left side because of all of the adhesives and inflammation that I had. So, and here I was in my 30s teaching women's health, and I was still wrestling with these issues and I wasn't sure how to resolve them. And so what I ended up doing, I did so many things. I mean, everything from straight on physical healing, whether it was massage, bodywork, supplements, nutrition, exercise, you name it. But then I also, in acupuncture and, a lot of different modalities. And I also did energy healing. I did emotional regulation. But I would say the thing that really turned the key for me was I started painting. I started creating art and really connecting into color in a different way. And I don't think that necessarily healed me, but it's kind of like, sometimes we try so many things and there's just like there's that one or two things like on top of everything else, it just like turns the key. And so eventually resolved my issues. My uterus cleared up, my gut cleared up, my lab values were great. And then welcome to perimenopause, right? Just one minute, I had a whole host of other things. Yeah. So I feel like our bodies are always teaching us something. Again, back to our cycles, the rhythms that run us. As women, we are beautifully, dynamically complex and layered. And I feel like in some ways it's been a gift. I look back now as like, my period was my messenger, and I feel like if I knew then what I know now, I think my teenage years would have been a bit different. But, they needed to happen like they did. So that's kind of how I got here.
So, just so everyone who has a teenage daughter right now is listening, if you were in your 20s before you knew your mom was right?
Asking for a friend. How many years moms are right? Yeah.
Good to know. But I love that you talked about this aspect of art for you because I don't like was helpful because I don't think we talk enough about the pleasure, the purpose, the rupturing of and release of things like emotionally in our life and how big of an impact that plays on our hormones. Do you see that in practice?
Oh, 100%. To me, hormones are emotional messengers. We produce and respond to things in our life through hormones and neurotransmitters, right? So in functional medicine, we call hormones the communicators.
Mm.
So there are 7 nodes on the functional medicine matrix, and hormones are under the communication bucket. They communicate what we are feeling. And so think of it like how we feel when we have low or high estrogen in our bodies or progesterone or testosterone. It can completely change our behavior. And in fact, I was just looking at a study this past weekend where this researcher was looking at the 5 top themes that help people to recover from illness. And one of them was emotions. It was like really getting into the deeper ditch of what are our emotions telling us, looking at trauma, looking at emotional regulation, forgiveness practices. And I would say that for me, that was my sticky wicket. That one wasn't easy. I grew up in a Catholic, very strict household. My father was a police officer. I went to Catholic school as well. So it was like rules upon rigidity, upon discipline. And it was like, was there any room to just kind of be the sensitive child, right? Like I would say out of my siblings was a little bit more that highly sensitive kid. So I think I was just a more hormonal girl. And so then, you kind of see like, well, where does that play in the body? For some people that might be their gut, it might be their skin, it might be their heart, it might be their brain, whatever it is. But I think for me, my biggest, loudest messenger, so just to speak to your whispering concept here, is it truly was my reproductive tract. It was my ovaries, it was my uterus, it was even having a blocked fallopian tube of all things.
Yeah. That's amazing when you think of it like that. And you're right. It is, I think it's got to be one of the most challenging things, for women because it's so intangible in a way. Like we can tell women or we can tell and women are so good at doing. So we can be like, okay, do these labs and follow this protocol and take this supplement. But how do you teach someone to play and have fun and relax and do, even nervous system regulation can be, can be hard. It feels not very productive for people.
100%. And I'm partly laughing here because it's like, yeah, that is the challenge. Like, how do we have fun? How do we play? How do we embrace pleasure without guilt and shame?
Mhm.
So I do think, and also I went down the path of science, which is really a very I don't know, just further discipline, further rigidity, further having to prove yourself. A lot of, I would call them more young or masculine principles of having to perform,
Mm.
having to validate. And so all of that sets the stage for a lot of cortisol dysregulation. And I think we underestimate the role of cortisol in a lot of menstrual disturbances, actually. For me, I don't think it was so much estrogen and progesterone. They were just following cortisol.
Yeah.
and I was a stressed out kid. So, yeah, I think that's kind of where it all is coming from, and we need to look at that web of hormones and how it's all communicating within.
Yeah. I'm just going to ask you to talk about that because I think we very quickly blame our sex hormones, especially as we hit this time in our life. But I think what you said is so important for women to understand is that they're kind of the last in the tipping line of things, aren't they? There's so many pieces of the puzzle that have to kind of go right for them to go right and that have to go wrong for them to go wrong. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, I'm totally in sync with that. I mean, I kind of see it like just in a very simple way, like bricks of a house.
Mhm.
The first foundation is truly, it's like a triangle. It's cortisol, glucose, and insulin. Like if we can get our stress response married very well to how we deal with blood sugar and insulin and digestion,
Mm.
that's a rock solid core upon which we build our hormone house. And I think that if that's shaky, everything else is shaky. The sex steroids are shaky, the other sex steroids, because of course cortisol is a glucocorticoid, so it's related. But like melatonin is shaky, thyroid hormone can be shaky. So I do think that forming that, and I wish I kind of knew that. And I think stress is really hard for us to get our arms around. But the antidote to stress is like it'll never go away. We'll always have something to stress about, but it's about plasticity, resilience, and it's also about expression. And what is healthy expression? Because I think for most women in most societies, this is not everybody, but there's a little bit of kind of the aspect of like how you express your emotions and is it a sign of weakness? And it's kind of like, come on, you know, my mom, I must say, she's a very strong person. Always kind of forging through things. I always kind of make a joke in our family, like strong like bull. She's she is like she has Eastern European roots and she has it. Like, you feel it. And so I always felt like a little flimsy flower next to her because I'm like, my mom is like this pillar of strength. I mean, even now, she's like just an incredible person in so many ways. She's always been a great teacher for me. So I think for me, like to figure out my own way to express my emotions was important because how I needed to express is not how she needed to express. Like we all need to find our way. And I feel like that's where creativity comes into this
Mhm.
because we can have different forms of creativity to be our vehicle of expression. Whether it is, I remember I was writing poetry when I was a teenager. Like my outlet was like having my journal, being in my room alone, just like writing out poems. And I even submitted poetry for like contests and everything because I was just writing so much. Like it was like how I was getting things out. I would journal a lot. And then I was always kind of interested in color, but never really woke up to it until I started going through this more personal process.
Mm.
I took my first yoga class when I was 19 and I was introduced to the chakra system,
Oh,
which
yeah.
is Eastern, I would say, philosophy and spiritual wiring, which I actually see as the endocrine system within us.
Huh.
So I kind of got tuned into color from that, but then like started painting a little bit later in my 20s when things started to heat up in my body.
Can you draw that link for me, the endocrine system and the 7 chakras? My
Yeah, I mean, so I kind of have this science and spiritual
Ah, I
two
like
ways
it.
of thinking, but they at one point they converged. So when I first took that yoga class when I was 19, like we mostly learned about the asanas or the poses. But then as I went on deeper into yoga and I started taking world religion courses and philosophy, I started to see that yoga was connected to something deeper, which was essentially these centers of the body, which classically we think of them as seven main centers, like the root chakra, sacral, solar plexus, the heart, throat chakra, third eye chakra, and also the crown.
Yeah.
But when I was in school and studying biology and medicine, I was pre-med at the time, I was like, these kind of look like the endocrine glands. It's like adrenals, ovaries, pancreas, heart. throat, which would be the thyroid. Then we've got the hypothalamus, pituitary. Then we have the pineal gland. It's like, wait a minute, maybe what the ancients were tapping into is really the circuitry on the inside, right? Creating that symphony. So, yeah.
My mind, you just made art and science come together, or like spirituality and science to connect, which is a rare thing to do.
Well, that's great. I mean, I was really trying to reconcile both these paths because, I was in school studying, but then I had these other interests, which, I would have to go and hang out at bookstores on the weekend and read different books. And I started reading Carolyn Mace, Anatomy of the Spirit, Candace Pert, Molecules of Emotion, Bruce Lipton, Biology of Belief. I started to realize like there was more than just the physical, scientific approach to the body. And I started to realize like, wow, we are very emotional. I already knew that, but like didn't really want to bring that to the forefront in the same way that I do now. The mental aspect, the energetic aspect, the spiritual, which I define as meaning and purpose. So yeah, I mean, and then I wrote the first book that I published was in 2008, and it was on chakras and food because I soon came to see, like, even in clinical practice, like, wow, I started every person I was speaking to in my mind, I was diagnosing them based on energetic imbalance. Even though they would come in for certain things and they're working with the medical doctor, I'm working with them on food. I was thinking in my mind, like, oh, this person really they have a deficient heart chakra. They have an upregulated root chakra. They need more protein. They need more leafy green. Like I started just to like do it in practice.
Wow.
And then I realized like there's like this operating system. Like I'm connecting the food with our physical and energetic aspects. And so then I wrote about it. I was writing about what I had seen. Eventually, it came to be known as the rainbow diet because many people didn't know what chakras were. Even my mother, who was, more religious in her orientation, she was like, what are chakras? This is kind of, and so I thought, okay, the people that know what they are, they're going to know. If you know, you know. If you don't know, that's okay because there's truth here to what they're conveying.
I love that. And let's talk about that because I think like I know your work around eating the rainbow is so well known. So can we talk a bit more deeply around how
Yeah.
color-coded nutrition supports these areas of detoxification, of hormones, of overall vitality in a way that maybe feels practical for our busy midlife women who are listening?
This chart is the operating system that I use, and it's in my books. It's on my website. People can download it. It's called the Seven System of Full Spectrum Health. So basically, what you have here are the different colors. We're going to go through them. We're going to go through them from a hormone perspective, as well as a like food perspective. And to your point about making this practical, I also have a questionnaire that people take. It's in the book, but it's also on my website. People can just do it. And it'll give you a readout of like, oh, your sacral chakra, your flow system is out of balance. It's just done numerically just through like 25 questions per of each of these systems.
I will make sure those links are in the show notes for everyone listening right now. So go and take the quiz. I'm already excited to take it. So
Well, let me start with you actually. We'll go through each color quickly, but what's the color you're vibing to lately? Do you have a certain color?
ironically, I was just the other day saying like I'm feeling very drawn to yellow lately. I was in Sedona. I'm like everything yellow is pulling me in. So that's what I would say.
Let's actually start with yellow, even though normally I start with like red, orange, yellow, green. But let's actually start with yellow because of the people that have responded to the quiz, and there have been thousands of people that have taken this quiz, what I had seen is that the yellow system, which coincides with the solar plexus chakra, or what I call the fire system, it's the fire element of the body, and it sits in the seat of rotting and ripening, which is the upper gut. We're talking the stomach, pancreas, and liver, and the small intestine. And 80% of people, according to this quiz, have an imbalance here. Like they are so not in alignment with their gut health. So sometimes when we're drawn to a color, it's like we need the color as nourishment. Maybe that's more psycho-spiritual, energetic. It might actually translate into food. It might not. It might mean that you have too many yellow foods like pasta and breads, cookies, crackers, all of like the refined carbohydrates.
Yellow.
Right. think of everything on a spectrum, right? It's not good or bad. It's just, where things fall on that spectrum. And so, like, some of those things are a little bit too processed carbohydrate. This is the center of burning. And when we are burnt out, it's like too much yellow, too much of our fire is coming out.
Mm.
Um, so, with this, what I think about as a carbohydrate center, I just kind of keep it very like simple. So if you had an imbalance in this and we were working together and I soon came to see like, oh, you've got some gut issues,
Mm.
you're drawn to sweets, you have cravings for sweets, you get tired after eating. I start to see like there's blood sugar imbalance. This is like the classic hormone perspective because the endocrine system here is the pancreas.
Yeah.
If I see like, oh, you're not digesting, you can kind of put it together, right? So then I would start to be thinking about more balancing it with protein and fat, making sure all of your macros are balanced. Maybe you need some yellow foods to help support the liver, like
Lemon.
ginger, lemon, bioflavonoids. Maybe you need to move into more of a yellow sweetener, like just banana, like if you do have a connection to sweetness or honey. So I kind of look at it like through the lens of color, but then also the energetics of the food and how that might be connected to like the symptoms.
That is really, really cool. So for women, I'm thinking of everyone listening, and it's like, so we understand, we've talked about a lot of things already. We understand that like we have this hormonal shift happening in perimenopause, but ultimately this kind of rock solidness of, cortisol, blood sugar, insulin, it is really a big key in keeping, I think, the stress from the inside out, right? Like there's, as you said, there's stress on the
Yep.
outside where we can use and work towards finding creative outlets to probably reduce the feeling of it. And then there's this stress on the inside where we can come and use your quiz to almost look for where maybe some of these imbalances are and start with food by eating the rainbow.
Yeah, and lifestyle too, because one of the columns in this chart is also lifestyle. So for somebody with a yellow fire imbalance there, like the cortisol, insulin, and glucose, it's more mindfulness with eating, the timing of your eating, not doing multiple things when you're eating because the
Front of us for
like
you.
working. Because the fire center is the doing center, and just what you were saying a little while ago about how, like, we're always primed to do instead of be. And the fire centers, it's like a fire that you would actually have. Like, if I think of, like, a bonfire, you just wanna stoke the fire every once in a while, right? You just want a little bit of heat. You don't want that thing blazing, and you don't also want it almost going out to embers. You want just the right amount of fire and also at the right time. And if this system is not in play and not healthy, it's going to show up in perimenopause.
Mm-hmm.
It will show up as like your first sign. It'll be like, hello, the fire system shows up. So what do you get? You get hot flashes. You get night sweats. Like if you think of like all of the imbalance of fire in the body,
Yeah.
and this even harkens to elemental forms of medicine. I'm married to an acupuncturist, so we talk east west all the time. He does traditional Chinese medicine, the energetics of yin yang. And that's kind of the thing. Women haven't cultivated their yin, so their yang rises, so they start to get the heat. I look at that in terms of like more chakras and more like just more medical science in terms of like, again, what you described as what we were talking about, the cortisol, insulin, and glucose.
That's fascinating. You must have fascinating dinner conversations.
I like it. I like to see how people eat, how they think about food. The thing about yellow, just to go back to your choice, and that was the color for you. Yellow psychologically is the color of optimism, joy, hope. It's kind of seen as a very happy color.
Mm.
There was a study that was in Manchester, England. This is many years ago now, but they had people state what their favorite color was around a wheel with all these different colors. It's called the color wheel. And for the people that chose yellow, kind of like, a sunshine yellow, that kind of yellow color, they tended to have normal mood. Like there might be a connection between our color connection and our actual like emotional mental state. I don't think that that is always true.
Yeah.
But, sometimes we might need more yellow. We might need to wear yellow. I remember in one of my homes, I painted the kitchen yellow because I always wanted the feeling of fire, transformation, digestion. I was like really it was like just honoring my fire system by having the kitchen be yellow.
Yeah.
So,
Oh,
lots of different things we can do with that.
so many different things. I feel like I jumped ahead of this, and maybe I should just kind of back us up a little bit. But, what do you think, like for women in midlife, what do you think we are most misinformed about right now when it comes to our health and our hormones?
About jumping into HRT or jumping into any kind of hormone prescription without really looking at the bedrock of our being. And that can be nutrition, lifestyle, just basic supplements to kind of get things all kind of ironed out. I kind of see it like we're traveling the road of life. And throughout our maybe even like 0 to 10, we've had trauma, adverse childhood events. We get into our teens, we have other things that happen. Maybe in our 20s, we start to see issues with inflammation. In our 30s, we start to see autoimmune conditions preclinically. Like things are percolating on up. And like how we show up to perimenopause is basically how we've been showing up to life, but it hasn't always been visible.
Yeah.
So I think that women think, there's a lot of conversation right now about hormone replacement therapy kind of being like a band aid and like, okay, just take this. And I must say, even in my 20s, because I had such a tumultuous menstrual cycle, like every month was like, it just was painful. It just put a kibosh on all of my like socializing. And so I went on the pill.
Mhm.
So, and that was like the thing that my gynecologist was able to offer me. There wasn't functional medicine around like it is now, where it's like, oh, wait a minute, I actually need to be thoughtful about this and ask questions and get into root causes and look at this. So, I think where there is, I would say I don't know if it's misinformation or just fragmented information in the way of like, I think we just need to embrace the fact that we have a fuller physiology connected to psychology that just like I was on my path trying many different things, it's not always just jumping into the HRT and thinking that that's going to work. And that's why it doesn't work for every woman.
Oh, yeah. Often because you're right, it's not just about the production, it's which for many women when you're younger, it's not. Like, we have to figure out
Right.
why you're not producing, but it has so much to do with those pathways, the metabolism, the detox of them. And then if you add more fuel to that fire, that's when we have women who are like, "Well, mentally I feel better, but now I'm gaining weight, or now I have digestive issues, or now I have bloating." And I think that's, equally as hard.
Actually, you and I are very much on the same page. We didn't even talk about this beforehand, but even on my Instagram this morning, I posted how I think about supplements for hormone health. And one of the things is I think about the pathways of hormones. It's not just like what you said, it's not just synthesis.
Yeah.
It's really, I think we have to think, I call it STAME. S for synthesis, transport, activation, metabolism, excretion. And most women are just focused on, like, let me just get more hormones. But like you said, are we just adding fuel to the fire? What if we have genetic variants that don't enable us to properly metabolize estrogen? And now we've got more genotoxic estrogens, and, we haven't accounted for that, right? So I think we need to take a fuller spectrum approach to looking at hormones because they're very dynamic and such small amounts in the body, but such powerful, potent effects at the cellular level. So we need to tend to them. We need to look at their entry, their what they're doing in our bodies, and then their exit, because eventually they need to exit and stop. We can't just have like certain metabolites circulating all the time because there's a process that they go through. And I think we need to think about nutrition in that process. This is a lot what I lecture on is like, what are the macronutrients, the micronutrients, the phytonutrients, the dietary supplements we need for synthesis, transport, activation, metabolism, and excretion, because they're each different. And what if you've got issues with maybe activation, like maybe you don't have good cellular health, getting your omega 3s on point. That's important. Reducing inflammation in the body so that the cells can properly function and receptors aren't distorted, right? So, like, each one of those buckets are really so important to work through with a practitioner.
Right. And maybe that's your answer, but I was gonna ask because I can hear the women's questions from the podcast.
How do I do that?
Part of this stain, you call it? Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
bubbling with, is there how do I know? Are there common signs and symptoms where I think women can really see themselves in that? Or do you feel really strongly that we should work with practitioners?
I think both.
Yeah.
I think both can be true. I think that there are some basics that we can do ourselves. I do think testing is powerful. However, test don't guess kind of a thing. Like for me personally, I love Function Health. I do it twice per year. I get a gauge on my nutrients, my hormones. I can course correct. So, like, I think what happens with, let's just take supplements as an example, like even back to omega 3s, like people get on a supplement like omega 3s, and then they're just doing the same amount. They're not thinking through it and they're never measuring. So then they don't know like where they need to be or if they have too much, too little, like are they in their sweet spot? So I think a little bit of measuring, and not everybody understands how to like read labs, right? So that's where you would need a practitioner to guide you. But just to quickly like thumbnail each of those buckets. So like synthesis would be the absolute amount of those hormones in your body. And so many times we can even symptomatically assess, like if we're perimenopausal or even if we have issues with PMS,
Mhm.
any number of menstrual difficulties, we can kind of say, like, oh, symptomatically, and we might have some issues with synthesis or the balance of those things together, right? So, not enough progesterone, too much estrogen.
Yeah.
So, that's synthesis. Transport, I think about there are certain markers in the blood. We can look at things like albumin, sex hormone binding globulin, even
Yeah.
being properly hydrated.
Mhm.
How do we move things through the body? Through fluid and moving it through the blood. And it needs a carrier protein for the most part, or a lipid with a protein.
Yeah.
So, do we have enough protein in the diet? Do we have enough hydration?
Mhm.
Like,
Minerals. Yeah.
yes. So there are basics there. The activation, I think about like phytoestrogens. I think about, again, the cellular health, looking at omega 3 as an index. And so there's a test that people can do for that very easily. And then metabolism, typically that's a little bit of a tricky one because I see that as a two-part thing with a little bit more sophistication, where that is, I do think it behooves us to know our genetics because
Mhm.
then we're going to know exactly where we might skew in terms of metabolizing certain hormones. Your genetics don't change. Your epigenetics do, but your genetics don't.
Mhm.
So if you know that you are an inefficient methylator,
Mhm.
that's going to change your hormone status. So you might need throughout your life adequate amounts of certain B vitamins and other cofactors to ensure that you are properly routing that estrogen through you. Excretion. Are you pooping every day? Are you peeing regularly, right? Like basics there. Yeah, if you're constipated, there can be issues. So, and how can you help with excretion, right? Just looking at the estrobolome, which is the microorganisms that connect to metabolism of things like estrogen and other hormones. So that again could require a little bit more testing. And so again, it's not like you have to do testing for everything, but if you want to dial things in for you specifically, and you're going to be different at different life stages, right? Especially through perimenopause, there's going to be more flux there. So many times practitioners can just do that symptomatically, but if you really want to get into the nuance of each of those 5 categories, sometimes it requires a little bit more there.
I think what's been so incredible, I do think women, especially as we're heading into this phase of our life, we appreciate investing in our health in a new way. And I think we are seeing more and more women, looking at this as an investment of like, okay, how do I put a certain amount of money away, every single month to invest in more customized health? Because we've now been through 40, 50, however many years of not customized health or more general health, and then we kind of see where we're at. So I love that you shared that because I think it's a window into ourself when we can yeah, be more customized like you were saying, even with just the omega 3s, understanding, okay, well, you're going to take the same amount of omega 3s forever. Do you even need that? Do you need more? Like what's going on? Only
Right.
we look.
I call it the shiny object syndrome or SOS. So many women are just throwing money at different supplements and not really knowing. They just feel like, oh, maybe I should be taking that because everybody's talking about creatine. So I must need creatine.
Yeah.
right? So then they just start throwing money at supplements without like really being a little bit more sophisticated and kind of like, again, knowing their own personalized needs. So I do think it could save you money and then put your money in a different lane of spending in order to make it even more personalized and tailored to you. So I don't think of it as like, oh, just socking money away. I almost see it as like a redirection. Like, maybe you don't need those 5 supplements. Maybe you need 5 other supplements actually, and you're gonna feel better, so you're gonna be able to do more and have better quality of life. So, at the end of the day, I think all of us want not just health, but we want happiness and we want the energy to do the things that we wanna do in life. So, if we have more of that and a greater sense of well-being, I think it's worth it, and I think even vitality, right? Like, how do you put a price on that? Everybody's so focused on longevity these days. And it's like, why? Because we're looking for health and happiness. We're mostly looking for happiness and satisfaction and fulfillment. Health is one of the ways to get there. So I think of it as like, yeah, instead of like racking up lots of copays and, medical bills, it's like we're investing in ourselves earlier in life so that we don't have to do all of the major course correction later in life.
I love that. And I think you're right. Like, along with, with supplements, speak with clients all the time and they're like, well, these are all the supplements I'm on. I'm like, oh, why are you on that? I don't know. Just because, and I have fallen prey to this. I'm like, me too. It's very promising on Instagram at 2 a.m. Let's just pop it, like. I feel like detox is kind of one of these like buzzy words that get us sucked into as well, or like, certainly parasite cleanses I hear, or liver cleanses, but detox I feel like specifically is a word that gets thrown a lot around a lot and misunderstood. How do you define true detoxification, and what does effective support actually look like in the body if we know it plays a big role in those triangle in that big three?
Good, healthy detoxification is looking at what's going in and what's coming out.
Mm.
And for some of us, a lot of things are going in and it's not coming out. Just like actually hormones are treated as part of the metabolic detoxification pathways. So a hormone and a toxin, they travel in a very similar path.
Mhm.
So when I think about detoxification, and I have a book on detox, and I teach for the Institute for Functional Medicine on this. So I think of it as physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. Like physically speaking, I think of organ systems. I think of the lungs. I mean, just think of all of the air and the pollutants in the air and having proper air filtration. I think of water and kidneys. I think of the gut, obviously, and what we're eliminating because of like the sum of all the body systems working together. I think of the liver. I think of the skin. I think of the lymph. In the brain, I think of the lymphatic fluid at night. We're actually clearing a lot of the amyloid protein that builds up in our brain. Our brain is very metabolically active. Like it's taking a lot of blood sugar, it's taking that glucose and using it. So it's churning out metabolites. So just like the liver, it's just that our brain is working during the day, so we can't really properly clear it, which is why we need to be sleeping at 2 a.m. because that is like we're in the throes of that healthy brain clearance. So physically, I see like it's tending to those different body systems with nutrition and lifestyle practices for sure. Emotionally, I think, the way that I define a toxin is anything that stands in the way of our optimum health. So that could be emotional baggage, it could be a heavy metal, it could be a plastic, it could be a toxic relationship, whatever it is, whatever gets us to be inflamed or, even fuel our own toxicity through inflammatory cytokines or, eating a ultra processed diet, just very simple things. So I talk about like, physical, our food, emotional toxins. I talk about mental toxins. I talk about just like even not moving and being sedentary can be very toxic because we're not like moving those things out of the body. We're not circulating them on through. So everybody has the ability to detoxify. So one of the criticisms is, why is she even talking about detoxification? Our bodies are already doing those things. I'm sweating, I'm pooping, I'm peeing, I'm crying, I'm clearing things out all the time. That's true. But You are in Phoenix, you're in a warm environment, I'm in a cooler environment, I'm not sweating as much as you.
Mm.
And also, we don't know how each of us actually has enzymes that differ in their capacity to move things through.
Mm.
So, genetically, some of us just are going to be like what we would refer to as the canaries in the coal mine, meaning
Mhm.
like you go into a place and you have greater sensitivity than most people because you may not have enzymes that are working well to move those things out quicker. So you start to accumulate them and then you start to get symptoms. I remember I was giving a talk some years ago and people were coming into the room, and it was probably a room set for like, I don't know, like 100 people.
Mm.
And a woman came in before I would get in there a little bit early and set up. And she came up to me and she said, I just want you to know I'm going to be sitting in the very back of the room, but that's not because I'm not interested. It's just that, you know, as people come past me, sometimes there's too much fragrance, there's too much, and it's just overwhelming to me and I need to leave the room.
Oh, God.
And, case in point, right? Like sometimes we're easily overloaded for various reasons. And so food, air, water, these are the vehicles where these toxins tend to come in, right? So, the air that we breathe, I mean, just even toxic light exposure, artificial blue light at night. We call this ALAN, artificial light at night, when we should not be getting artificial light, is not good for the eyes. That's just another aspect of, potential toxicity. So I give you a long answer to the
No.
question, but
I'm listening to you, and I mean, for me, this is very fascinating, but I can imagine for the women, who don't have a living and a career and a passion in this, how overwhelming this is for everything. So maybe we can kind of simplify it, or
yeah.
you can, Deanna, for it in terms of like, okay, what can we be doing for best practices for our health right now? And maybe include in that like any tools or supplements that you do think are maybe safe without testing for women.
I would say before we even get to supplements, just focus on the things that you do every day. So, food, air, and water, let's just chunk those out because that's like where you're going to get the biggest return from whatever changes you make.
Yeah.
Our bodies are mostly water. So, I believe that water is a big conduit of many different toxicants. I don't only believe that, it's a fact, right? Whether we are bathing in it or we are drinking it, we're washing in it, water is everywhere. So we really need to be sure that we have good, healthy water, that it's filtered, it's purified. What are we drinking out of even,
Mhm.
right? Just the obvious of like trying to get rid of or minimize all plastic.
Yeah.
Um, so, and as people are listening to this, just think of like the one thing that you can make a change in. I mean, I've been doing this work for over 20 years and there are still things I'm changing, right? Like you can't do it all at once. Sometimes you just have to chunk it out. But I think that the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak, is water. Even if you can have a very basic, if you don't have a lot of money, just having a very basic filter at home, a Berkey filter, if you go on the EWG.org site. They have a whole section on water filters.
Yeah.
What you can do is put in your zip code, see kind of if you're on a well, you obviously won't be able to have access to this, but for the general city water, they have reports as to what's in there. Now, it's going to be pretty basic, but you can get a sense of your water and what you might be up against. Like in some areas, it might be higher in arsenic.
Mm.
So just do a little bit of digging, and the EWG site makes it a bit easy in that way. I went a little bit further over the years, and what I did was I got my water at my home tested, and I actually do it every couple of years just to be sure that the filters are working well.
Yeah.
But we have in this house that we live a whole home filtration system. Fortunately, it came with the house. So we and then we actually even double up because then the refrigerator has its filter. So there's filtered water going through the filter.
Yeah.
Now, there is a downside to that. The downside is that we are taking out a lot of the contaminants. That's good. But we're also taking out minerals,
Yeah.
right?
Mineralize that water. Mhm.
Yes. So people will ask me, Deanna, hey, what do you think about a reverse osmosis filter? That's really going to be extracting a lot of those precious minerals. So it's just about repletion, making sure, like even in my water that I drink, I mean, this is kind of cloudy. It's not because it's dirty, it's because it has minerals in it.
Yeah.
So water and minerals, like even a little bit of, I use Himalayan crystal salt.
Mm.
You can take like a super saturated solution, just take a spoonful of that salty water, putting it in purified water, and now you've got 84 trace elements and minerals together with the water. Small amounts, right? So, like, you're not gonna be increasing your sodium. You're bringing in, like, the spectrum of different things. And also, water follows the osmotic gradient, which means that if there's a higher concentration of something, it's gonna move in that direction to dilute it.
Yeah.
But when you have minerals together with your water, it's actually, in theory, promoting better uptake.
Yeah.
So, I think starting with water is the easiest, biggest thing that we can
Your
be doing.
biggest ROI is start with water. Okay. And then of course for food we can, you take your quiz and use this kind of rainbow eating of the rainbow. I think that's a beautiful tool that you've made for people.
Well, here's another thing about food. Yeah, you can do the quiz, but there are four principles to help you with toxic exposures with food. One is definitely get your colors, get diversity within the color, even. So, like, if we just think of red foods, it's not like you always want to do strawberries. And by the way, strawberries they tend to be layered with pesticide, insecticide, and herbicide. So, you definitely want organic there, but diversify.
Yeah.
So when we diversify colors, foods, we aim for 30 unique foods per week. This is not only helping us with our nutritional status, but also in some way helps to protect against bioaccumulation of toxins. So, like, just imagine it. You buy the same butter and you have the same butter every day. What
Mhm.
tends to happen? Everything in that butter is going to start to accumulate, right? Especially because it's a fat, and fats accumulate in the body differently than a water soluble substance. So when you change things up all the time, it's a way to actually protect yourself from nothing bioaccumulating, and you actually enrich your gut microbiome when you do that. And there's really good science on it. I'm sure I'm not the only person that everybody has heard this from, but if you look at the American Gut Project, their focus is more the gut. My focus, we're in our conversation here, we're talking about more toxicity, nutritional status. And just being up on your nutrients, if you're eating a more nutrient dense diet by eating the rainbow,
Yeah.
you're actually protecting yourself and you're helping your detoxification pathways.
Those are great tips. Okay, so we know where to start with our water. We can do even something super simple and then make sure to mineralize it, eat the
Yes.
colors. And then do you have one more tip for us or
Well, I was going to mention, so I brought in the diversification. So I have four principles in the rainbow diet. One is color, one is creativity, which means like, just being a little bit more open minded about how we put things together and get out of our food ruts. Number three is variety, diversity, aiming for that 30 plants or more per week. But even animal foods, if you eat animal foods, you should diversify those too. Go to different markets, go to different stores, different farmers, different food supply. I mean, I think too that is also ensuring protection.
yeah.
The other thing to think about is a different kind of aspect to toxicity, and that is when we eat. I call it rhythm. So when we eat in season, we're actually giving to our bodies what we most need biologically in order to do best in that season. The example I usually give is like apples. Where we live here, Washington State is an apple state, not so much Arizona, but definitely here in Washington. But you've got other things, so that's good. We all have things, and in fact, that's what we have to look at is where do we live? Where are we spending most of our time? Because there's a reason. There's a reason that things are growing where you're at, and then when you're living there, those things that grow there may actually help you to just physiologically do better. So when I think of apples coming up in season, like we even have apple trees in our yard, and every September, they're just like got a bunch of apples on the tree. And if I think of it, it's like, it's amazing how nature works because those apples are rich in quercetin,
Mhm.
which is really good to help the body with its inflammatory immune response. And as allergies start to rear their head, as people move into autumn, it's just a beautiful system of how
Yeah.
wherever we're at, if we're truly eating locally and what grows there, it's in some ways protective. So it's the when of eating and not just in season or not, but then also through the day night. I lecture a lot on circadian rhythm,
Yeah.
and we can have a very healthy meal, but make it very unhealthy for the body by having it at the wrong time.
Mm.
This is where people they don't eat breakfast, they barely eat lunch, maybe they eat like a really, really late breakfast into lunch, and then they just pile it up for dinner.
Yeah.
And then this is not good because now we're creating cellular toxicity because we can't digest it all before we go to bed. Melatonin is the sleep hormone. Insulin is think of it as a blood sugar metabolism hormone. And now they're butting heads because they don't work well together in the same space. So the goal there would be it's about the timing of your eating, the rhythm of your eating seasonally and from a circadian perspective.
Deanna, you have given us so many. I feel so excited even about these simple tips at the end. But thank you so much for all of your amazing knowledge today and what you've shared. For everyone I want to get more into your world. Like for everyone who wants to get more into your world, who wants to learn from you, or maybe wants to learn more of what tools you might use, where would you point us today?
I would say my website, so deannaminich.com. If you look, there's a tab that says resources, and you'll find the quiz there. You'll find a lot of my downloadable tools there, like the Eat the Rainbow toolkit. All of it is just, educational materials. So feel free to download them, use them to work with your practitioner or, whatever works for you. But yeah, I feel like, sometimes we make things so complicated and they're really not. It's just like, I saw a social media post not too long ago, and it was all about our ancestors who who lived long ago. They weren't doing cold plunges and all of these, they weren't doing peptides and
Yeah.
stem cell therapy. Like we've got to get the basics down. We need the foundational basics down. It's okay to do those things potentially, but let's get the foundational basics. And there's always something that we can be tweaking and improving. So a lot of the tools that you're going to see on my site, they're more about fine tuning, dialing in those foundational basics.
I love that. And you've holistically taught us so well today. So thank you again so much for your time, for your energy, and for your tools. I really appreciate you.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, sisters, now you have some more amazing tools in your toolbox to go out and be more in your life and not just less on a scale. Everything is in the show notes. We'll catch you in the next episode.
If you're 35 plus and ready to stop guessing, start understanding your hormones, and feel your absolute best, hit subscribe. That's what we do here.